Hello, my dear students. Welcome to the next class of Appreciating Prose. In the last class, we have studied about Arundhati Roy, and today we are starting with her speech Come September. Let's get started. Come September is a powerful lecture Arundhati Roy delivered on 18th of September 2002 at the Landon Foundation in Santa Fe, New Mexico, United States. Lannan Foundation was established in 1960. Lannan Foundation promotes different cultures that support contemporary artists and writers. They also support activists. They also believed in the importance of literary art. Santa Fe is New Mexico's capital. The lecture she delivered is a critical attack on corporate globalization, US foreign policy, and the so called war against terror. US foreign policy includes their access to international resources, markets, to preserve the balance of power in the world. War on terror, it is launched by the US government after the September 11 attack, and US targets on primarily some extremist groups of the Muslim community, Al Qaeda or Islamic State, and their various franchisee groups. As President Bush stated, our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them. And Arundhati Roy lashes her critical attack on corporate globalization, US foreign policy, and the so called war against terror. I have so many things to say, and I hope I don't take too long to say them to you. I'm a writer, and so I have actually written what I want to say for two reasons. One, because I'm sure that you are much more interested in the way I write than in the way I speak. And second, because the things I have to say are complicated, dangerous things in these dangerous times, and I think we have to be very, very precise about what we are saying and how we say them and the language that we use. So I hope it's okay if I read it out to you. My talk today is called Come September. I have so many things to say, and I hope I don't take too long to say them to you. The speech she delivered is about 44 minutes. It's a small speech. And she says that she's actually has written the speech and she's going to read it out. She says that she has written the speech because she thinks that people are more interested in her writing than her speech. People are more interested in the way she writes. And the second reason is that the things that she is going to discuss, that she is going to deliver, is of controversial nature. It's of complicated things. So she need to be precise. That is why she has written it down. Otherwise, it can deviate. And people need to be very, very precise when they are speaking about something, especially something complicated things. And they need to be precise on the language they are using. So she is going to read her essay, her speech, her lecture. My talk today is called Come September. Writers imagine that they cull stories from the world. I am beginning to believe that vanity makes them think so. That's actually the other way round. Stories cull writers from the world. Stories reveal themselves to us. The public narrative, the private narrative, they colonize us, they commission us. David Morley's The Cambridge Introduction to Creative Writing, he mentions about Isabel Allende's argument. Isabel Allende is a Chilean writer. She claims that writers imagine that they tell stories from the world. That writers chooses stories. But she says that it is not like that. Actually, pride makes them think so. Vanity makes them think so. It is stories that select the writers. When you start writing, the narrative possibilities opens in front of you. It moves around you. She says that if you are planning everything and writing, if you are tying everything neatly, then there is no role for writer or reader because everything is there neatly displayed. That there is no possibility of a surprise element in that. Creativity and spontaneity should go hand in hand. Writers should be like that. As per Isabel Allende. Arundhati Roy also states from that stories actually select writers from the world. Stories reveal themselves to us in the process of writing. It is spontaneous, it automatically comes. It will open narrative possibilities. The public narrative, the private narrative, they colonize us. Public narrative is not personal narrative and it reflects perspectives, values. But personal narrative or private narrative, it is personal and can be the depiction of one's own feelings. They colonize us. When you start writing, if you are a real writer, you will be led throughout the way of writing. They commission us. You will be led to write. They insist on being told. Fiction and non fiction are only different techniques of storytelling. You can tell a story in a fiction or you can tell a story in a non fictional way. For reasons that I don't really fully understand, fiction dances out of me. It comes out easily. And non-fiction is wrenched out by the aching broken world I wake up to every morning. That is non-fiction. Writing non-fiction is not so easy. It is because of the things that are happening around her make her to write non-fiction. Issues around the world forces her to write non-fiction. For example, her work, The Algebra of Infinite Justice, it's political writing, and she addresses about terrorism, globalization, nuclear disarmament, capitalism. The theme of much of what I write, fiction as well as non fiction, is the relationship between power and powerlessness and the endless circular conflict they are engaged in. The theme of most of the things that she writes, whether it is fiction or non fiction, the theme is that of power, the relationship between the people in power and the powerlessness of the oppressed people, and the unending conflict they are into it. The people in power can direct or influence the behavior of other people, the dominant people in the society. They hold the power and the powerlessness of the oppressed people, the people who are marginalized. In her fiction, God of Small Things, also we can see this. John Berger, that most wonderful writer, once wrote, "Never again will a single story be told as though it is the only one. There can never be a single story." John Berger is a British essayist and cultural thinker. He is known for her work Ways of Seeing. He says that never again will a single story be told as though it's the only one. That is, ഒരു കഥ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഒരാളുടെ പേഴ്സ്പെക്റ്റീവിലാണ് ഒരു കഥ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. ഒരേ കഥ തന്നെ പല പേഴ്സ്പെക്റ്റീവ്സിൽ കാണുമ്പോൾ പല മീനിങ്സ് ആയിരിക്കും നമ്മൾക്ക് കിട്ടുന്നത്. ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് വൈ he says that Arundhati Roy says that there can never be a single story. There are only ways of seeing it. Arundhati Roy continues that, so when I tell a story, I tell it not as an ideologue who wants to pit one absolute ideology against another, but as a storyteller who wants to share her way of seeing. She wants to tell the story as a storyteller, not like a dogmatic person, an assertive person. An assertive person or an ideologue, they just set their ideology against another person. Ideologues, they state their beliefs confidently. Arundhati Roy wants to be a storyteller who just wants to share her way of seeing, her perspectives. Though it might appear otherwise, my writing is not really about nations and histories, but it is about power, about the paranoia and ruthlessness of power. Sometimes her writings also appear as the other way, but her writing is all about power. It's not about nations. She's not writing any history. Her major concern in her writing is about power, in fiction or non-fiction. The state of obsession towards power and the powerful people's uncompassionated nature to the other people. Her writing is all about the physics of power. I believe that the accumulation of vast, unfettered power by a state or a country, a corporation or an institution, or even an individual, a spouse or a friend or a sibling, regardless of ideology, results in excesses such as the ones I will recount here. The accumulation of the vast, unrestrained power for government, or the power in the hands of an individual or anybody, it results in excesses. It results in disparities in the society. Wherever the power operates, ഒരാളുടെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു ഡോമിനൻ്റ് ക്ലാസിൻ്റെ ഐഡിയോളജീസ് ആയിരിക്കും ആ ഒരു സൊസൈറ്റിയിൽ പോയിക്കൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ അവിടെ വോയിസ് ഇല്ലാണ്ടായിട്ട് വരുന്നത് ആർക്കാണ്? മാർജിനലൈസ്ഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ആൾക്കാർക്ക്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പവർ ഇല്ലാത്ത ആൾക്കാർക്ക് അവിടെ വോയിസ് ഉണ്ടാവില്ല. They are getting exploited, they are getting oppressed always, all the times. Living as I do, as millions of us do, in the shadow of the nuclear holocaust that the governments of India and Pakistan keep promising their brainwashed citizenry, and in the global neighborhood of the war against terror, what President Bush rather biblically calls the task that never ends, I find myself thinking a great deal about the relationship between citizens and the state. I've told you about in the introductory session about Arundhati Roy. She's been critical about the nuclear test. The government of India and Pakistan keep promising their citizens. The important countries, the major countries, have nuclear weapons with them, and the people are living in that shadow of nuclear holocaust. And the countries promises safety to the citizens, that their country is safe. We can destroy the other country with the help of their weapons. And in the global neighborhood of the war against terror. War against terror, I told you earlier. And President Bush calls it as the task that never ends. I find myself thinking a great deal about the relationship between citizens and the state, relationship between people in the country and the people in the power. Whether citizens in the country supports the government's take on national issues, But the thing is that we cannot blame all the decisions that are taken by the people in the power. We cannot be critical about all the decisions. Arundhati Roy here thinking about the relationship between citizens and the state, the people and power. In India, those of us who have expressed views on nuclear bombs, big dams, corporate globalization, and the rising threat of communal Hindu fascism, views that are at variance with the Indian governments, are branded anti national. The people who have expressed views on nuclear bombs, about big dams, Arundhati Roy raised voice against the Narmada Dam project. Her campaign, Narmada Bachao Andolan, and her take on corporate globalization, and her views regarding the communal Hindu fascism in the country. All these views of Arundhati Roy were different from the government's view. And she says that she was branded anti national, against the nation. In her work, The End of Imagination, she voices with clarity against nuclear weapons. Arundhati Roy says that anti Muslim massacres are happening in India. The democracy has been defected and it is laced with religious fascism, says Arundhati Roy. And she says that when she expressed her views against the government's views or government stance, she is labeled as anti-national. While this accusation doesn't fill me with indignation, it is not an accurate description of what I do or how I think. She's against that she's been labeled as anti-national. It is not the accurate description for what she is doing or what she is expressing about. Because an anti national is a person who is against his or her nation and by inference is pro some other one. Anti national രാജ്യദ്രോഹി എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ സ്വന്തം രാജ്യത്തിന് അഗെൻസ്റ്റ് ആയിരിക്കണം, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വേറെ ഏതെങ്കിലും രാജ്യത്തെ സപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്തിരിക്കണം. ബട്ട് ഇറ്റ് ഇസൻറ്റ് നെസസറി ടു ബി ആൻറ്റി നാഷണൽ ടു ബി ഡീപ്ലി സസ്പീഷ്യസ് ഓഫ് ഓൾ നാഷണലിസം ടു ബി ആൻറ്റി നാഷണലിസം. If a person is skeptical about the issues that are taken up by the national authorities or the government, you cannot call that person as anti-national. It is not necessary to be an anti-national. ഒരാൾ രാജ്യത്ത് നടക്കുന്ന എല്ലാ കാര്യങ്ങളിലും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഉൾക്കൊള്ളാൻ സാധിക്കാത്ത കാര്യങ്ങളെ കുറിച്ച് ഡൗട്ട്സ് റേസ് ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ ആളെ രാജ്യദ്രോഹി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് എങ്ങനെയാണ് മുദ്ര കുത്താൻ പറ്റുന്നത്? Nationalism of one kind or another was the cause of the most of the genocide of the 20th century. Extreme patriotism or negating the other nation's interest. Extreme nationalism was the cause of the most of the genocide of the 20th century. ഇപ്പം നമുക്ക് പാർട്ടീഷൻ്റെ സമയത്ത് തന്നെ എടുത്താലും ഒരുപാട് പേരാണ് അങ്ങോട്ടും ഇങ്ങോട്ടും ഒരുപാട് പേരെ കുത്തും കൊലയും നടന്നൊരു സമയമായിരുന്നു അത്. ഇന്ത്യയുടെ കാര്യം എടുക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ലോകത്ത് പലയിടത്തും നടന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഇന്ത്യയിലെ കാര്യം എടുക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ഹിന്ദുസിനുള്ളതാണ് ഇന്ത്യ എന്നുള്ളതും മുസ്ലിംസിനുള്ളതാണ് പാകിസ്ഥാൻ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് അവിടെയുള്ള രണ്ട് ഭാഗത്തുമുള്ള മൈനോറിറ്റീസിനെ കൊന്നും കൊലവിളിച്ചും നടന്നൊരു സമയം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു നമുക്ക്. നാഷണലിസം വാസ് ദി കോസ് ഓഫ് ദാറ്റ്. ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ദ നാഷണലിസം ഓഫ് വൺ കൈൻഡ്, സപ്പോർട്ടിംഗ് interest of one section of people. Now she is talking about flags. Flags are bits of colored cloth only that governments use first to shrink wrap people's brains and then as ceremonial shrouds to bury the dead. തിയേറ്റേഴ്സിൽ നാഷണൽ ആന്തം കൊണ്ടുവന്നത് ഒക്കെ ദേശീയത ആൾക്കാരിൽ ഉണ്ടാക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ടാണ്, ഒരു പേട്രിയോട്ടിക് സ്പിരിറ്റ്. And Arundhati Roy says that flags are just bits of colored cloth only. She's also critical about flags. Flags are always represented like it's a feeling of nationalism, and it also helps us to be more patriotic. It raises our patriotic spirits. It represents the hopes of the country, the aspiration for the country, and it is also the symbol of the national pride. But Arundhati Roy says that it is not like that. It is just bits of colored cloth that governments just use to shrink wrap people's brains. That is, by flags, government also injects, or government also aspires people to be more patriotic, to uphold their nationalistic spirit. And then they are just used as ceremonial shrouds to bury the dead people or soldiers or national figures. When independent thinking people, and here I do not include the corporate media, independent thinking people, intellectual people, begin to rally under flags, when writers, painters, musicians, filmmakers suspend their judgment and blindly yoke their art to the service of the nation, it is time for all of us to sit up and worry. When the writers or the intellectual people or art in the country, films in the country, they just work for upholding the nationalistic spirit, we need to worry on this thing. She says that the writers or the critics or the intellectuals in the country should be critical of the government. They should raise the questions. They should raise against the matters that are not good for the country or not good for the entire world. They should raise against all these things. If everybody in the country, including intellectuals and the artistic people, if they are all supporting the nationalistic spirit in the country, it is not good for the world. It is not good for the people. In India, we saw it happen soon after the nuclear test in 1998 and during the Kargil war against Pakistan in 1999. Several works were there regarding nuclear test and the Kargil war. When intellectual people rally under flags, when they support the things that are happening in the country, when intellectual people rally under flags that, for the events like nuclear test or the Kargil war against Pakistan, when people rally under flag, under Indian flag, it is that we need to worry on these things. She is against nuclear weapons, Arundhati Roy. She works for the disarmament of nuclear weapons. And she also says the intellectual people, when, or the other major writers or painters or musicians or filmmakers, the critics, when they all rallied under Indian flag during the Kargil war, when they were supporting the Kargil war against Pakistan, we need to worry on these things. When the people are getting increased in their nationalistic spirit, we need to worry. That is not good. In the US, we saw it during the Gulf War, and we see it now during the war against terror. That blizzard of made in China American flags. The people in the US also, or not all the people, but some certain intellectual, independent thinking people also, when they were rallied under their flags during the Gulf War or the war against terror by the American government against the extremist Islamist groups, we need to be worried. And she also says that those were American flags made in China. Rallying under flags means they are much favoring their own nation, supporting the interest of one's own nation. or negating the other nation's interest. The extreme national pride can be seen, can be understood from it, as per Arundhati Roy. So, children, I am stopping here. We will continue with Come September in our next class.